All right, guys, it looks like we are live. If you have just joined in, could you do me a quick favor and comment? If you're on LinkedIn, on Facebook, Facebook tends to letting me down with my streams. But if you are on LinkedIn, if you just could comment that my audio and everything is fine, I would truly appreciate that. And let me get straight into it, guys. So my name is Raf, and I'm working as a feedback coach and podcast host. And this is my weekly live feedback Q&A show where I answer your questions and your concerns around feedback conversations, but also each week has its own theme, has its own narrative. And this week's episode is super important because it's a build up on David Breer's question from last week about how can we build more trust with our team. And we do need more trust in order to our feedback conversations to be engaging, that they land and the people follow through it. So that will be the topic, guys, of today's live Q&A session. Feedback and trust. How can you build more trust by using feedback as the tool? Before I get into it, guys, actually, very quick announcement. I have just decided that this series will also be turned into podcast to create a library of tips and advices. So I'll just edit the audio, make it clean, make it sharp, and I will just upload it straight with my new podcast, which will be launched this week. Now, into the topic, guys. I haven't met most of you. I don't know you very well, but I'm safely assuming that you have your own goals. And those goals could go from your professional one to your personal one, to be the best, from becoming the best parent, best partner possible in your life, to becoming the next CEO or founder of a startup, or the best leader possibly there for your team. I don't know what your goals are, but I'm sure you have those goals. And to achieve those goals, you do need a feedback. And here's the thing. If you would go back in the time when you have been receiving feedback from people, then more likely you're going to find out these situations and instances where you haven't really received that feedback well, where you were a bit defensive and you were deflecting, you're looking for reasons to reject the feedback and to dismiss it. In reality, what's happening, we tend to sabotage our own career, our own growth by rejecting perfectly valid feedback. And if you really slow down and look a little bit deeper into the reasons why we tend to do and when it happens, you'll find out that the relationship that you have with feedback provider, with the person that shares that feedback with you, plays a significant role in that interaction. So as an individual, you know that you need feedback. You know that feedback will help you grow and improve and reach your goals, whatever those goals are, faster, quicker, better. And yet we find ourselves from time to time deflecting that feedback. Hey, Kirin, thanks for tuning in. Adrian, lovely to see you. Thanks, guys. Saludar, Adrian. So we tend to deflect that feedback because and you find out that the relationship that we have with this individual plays a significant role. Depending on whether you trust that person or not, you tend to respond to that feedback differently. And so do I. And so for that reason, today's session will be all about trust and how to build it more so people will more likely respond to your feedback with that receptive state. They will start that feedback conversation in that receptive state. They are more likely to engage and listen with curiosity and follow through with it. See, this lighter here serves me as a strong reminder of why trust is so important during feedback conversation. I found this lighter in my son's pocket. My older son, Nathan, is about my size and my build, and we tend to swap each other clothes. Well, to be more precise, he tends to borrow most of my clothes. But one day, it was my turn to borrow his jacket because it was quite rainy outside. I had to go to the shop and my jacket was in the washing machine. So I took his jacket, I put it on and went out. And as I was walking out, I realized there is some heavy object in the pocket here. So I checked it out and I found this lighter. Now, if you're a parent, you can imagine what was going through my mind. And if you're not, you can genuinely imagine, you know exactly what was going through my head, and that I had to address this issue. And therefore, I had to share some feedback with my son and engage in a conversation with him. Now, a rough few years back, would go back to Nathan's room. I would rely on my authority and seniority as a father figure. I would not check my emotions, and I would start the feedback conversation with something along those lines. Hey, what's this doing in your pocket? Or I would ask, dude, do you smoke? Or why do you smoke? Or since when you're smoking? All along those lines. It seems like it's perfectly fine to say it to your son because, hey, I found a lighter in his pocket. I am his father. I've got that authority over him and a seniority. And I've got all the rights to be worried. Now, if I have started conversation with any of the mentioned lines, immediately I would put Nathan on the defensive foot. But also, what would happen is I would quickly diminish the trust between me and him, because that's important to understand. In every feedback conversation, in every feedback interaction, depending how it goes, whether I'm handling it well as a feedback provider or it's perceived as I mishandled it, I will detract from the shared pool of trust between me and another person. So how I start the conversation, how you start every single feedback conversation really impacts on how the conversation will go and whether the trust will be added or depleted. Now, I didn't start this conversation with any of those. Instead, I walked to his room, I took this lighter, and I just only asked one question, and then I shut up. I said, Nathan, should I be worried? And that was all I said. My feedback wasn't filtered through my authority, through my seniority, through my strong emotions that I've initially experienced. I didn't bring them into the conversation. I just asked that question. Well, I didn't have the same conversation with his father around the same thing. Now, what happened is I had a difficult feedback conversation with my son, and I've built that trust with him on the spot. And here's another important part. In the moment, we are not only building or detracting from the shared pool of trust during a feedback conversation. That particular feedback conversation, on every particular feedback conversation, will have influence how the future conversation will go. So if my today's feedback conversation with any of you would result in detracting from that shared pool of trust, then my next conversation would be much more challenging for me, because from the get-go, you'd be focused and consumed with defending yourself, with looking for reasons and excuses and to getting away with your responsibility. Because I handle it differently, and I've added to that trust, my future feedback conversation already from the get-go are more likely to be engaging or more likely to be successful. And that's really important, because it has huge influence on how we're navigating with our team, how we're engaging with our team, and what relationship we're building with our team. And I have to mention it again, each feedback interaction adds or detracts from that shared pool of trust. There is one more important part in all of that, on that conversation that I had with Nathan, that has a huge influence, and it's really important for you guys in the workplace as a managers when you're engaging feedback conversations with your team. And here's another important part. In the future, should my son decide to smoke cigarettes? He doesn't. But should he do that, I'm not going to hold him accountable against the fact that he smokes, the fact that he spends money, the fact that it's bad for his health. All those are important factors, and they are important. But at the same time, all those factors he could just bounce it back with, well, it's my money, it's my health, it's my body, it's my life, Dad. And that would be a perfect response, especially in a way in which I choose to raise my kids. And I'll talk about it a little bit more in a few minutes. Now, but that's not the most effective and powerful way in which I could have the conversation with Nathan. Your goal as a manager and as a parent is to bring your kids and your employees into conversation emotionally. It's to give them irresistible reason to follow through with your feedback and to engage with you and to listen to you. So the future conversation will be rooted in, I have given you my trust, I've trusted you, you've broken it today because you told me that I shouldn't be worried and now I'm worried. So the whole conversation would shift it away from spending money, wasting your health, etc., and then move into, hey, we had this conversation, you gave me your word that you want a disengaged, sorry, that you won't be, you have nothing to worry about, and yet today I am worried. Oh, by the way, I just noticed my mic for Instagram is not plugged in, guys. Really, really sorry. Experience 101, how did Nathan react when you asked that question? Right, so how did he react? He was very open to it. I could see the first initial body language response, a little bit scared. As soon as I had this lighter in my hand, it was a bit, whoa, what's going on? When I asked that question, should I be worried? He was like, no, that shouldn't be worried at all. And I just waiting for him to elaborate. And you see, should I conclude it, or should I think or come to conclusion that this lighter in his pocket is there because he smokes, then the conversation will go in a completely different way. My assumptions will enter the conversation and I would navigate differently. I decided not to assume anything, and it's a good thing that I've done it. Because he didn't evaluate why he has this lighter, it has nothing to do with smoking. You see, what I didn't think, and here's our negativity bias, our tendency to assume the negative before the positive, and especially if the situation is emotionally charged, I've not contemplated one possibility, and that is Nathan had and still has a girlfriend at the time. And so he decided to have more candles in his room. Therefore, he needed something to light them up. And rather than relying on the light from my brother-in-law and from my wife, at the time she was smoking, she no longer does, he bought his own one for $5. Hence, he had this in his pocket. You see, if I start into this conversation, say, hey, why do you smoke? Do you smoke? On his behalf, he thought, well, you are judging me. You've arrived into wrong conclusion. You haven't provided me autonomy. You haven't provided me opportunity to answer my questions. The trust would be diminished. So by asking this question, I've created a completely different conversation here. But I elaborated it. It was pretty fine. I was like, cool, here's your lighter. And off you go. By the way, I took it from him just to use it on my workshops and just to have it on my shelf to remind me why trust is so important. And for any talks like this, like Q&A, or any talks that I do, and if I bring the trust story into the mix, I'm using this lighter as a reminder and the story, because it's really, really important, guys. Okay. So starting discussion without judgment was much more productive. Definitely, and here are a few reasons why it's so productive. Why it was so productive for me, and why it is so productive for you. If you start your feedback conversation without judgment, without jumping to your conclusions, drawing your conclusions, even if they are more likely to be true, because they might. Because what you're risking it with is, if you enter into the feedback conversation and you project your assumptions, and if you are wrong, what's going to happen is that person will question your intention as an individual. And as soon as within the feedback conversation interaction, an individual questions your intention, what happens is that person is consumed in defending themselves, deflecting the feedback rather than listening. The question is like, are you here with me or against me? And so if I project my judgments and they were wrong, then it goes southways. And what's also happening is now that I am creating a certain perception about you as my leader. Should the future conversation take place, I would again filter it through your intention and how you're being perceived, right? And I'll talk about intention and perception in a few minutes as well. So it's hugely important starting with those judgment and give that space. Autonomy, give the autonomy to the person is hugely important. Starting with the judgment, you're taking the autonomy away, because you are taking away the possibility to explain themselves without being forced to, almost. So that's why it's super critical. Let me just, guys, check. Where is my mic? I don't know where is my mic. I won't be plugging it in. I hope the guys on the Instagram can hear me very well, so I didn't plug my mic. But I think it's not bad to ask him to, do you smoke? I agree with your argument, but the question is natural, I think. You're right. There's nothing wrong with questioning your son whether you smoke or not. That was the merit of my conversation as a parent. But we have a choice to start conversation in different way. And how you start it, Adrian, will influence how the conversation will go. Each conversation, the first 10 seconds is critical to you. So if you think about Adrian, your first 10 seconds of conversation, how are you going to start it? Each word counts and matters for a lot. Because just imagine for a second, Adrian, if he doesn't smoke, and he doesn't, and my question is, do you smoke? Then subconsciously he thinks, you're assuming, you're judging me that I'm smoke. I thought we had a good relationship, father and parent, means I don't think you trust me. He may not verbalize it at the time. He may not say it at the time, but he will feel it that way. And so the whole trajectory will change. So yes, there is nothing wrong with that question, but I deliberately choose not to ask it to create more psychological safety and to sustain and maintain our relationship, father-son, on a respectful, trusty level. If I say, hey, do you smoke? Then I'm also saying the passive feedback from that is, I don't fully trust you that you don't. And that's really important here. So that's the reason why I choose not to ask that question and allow him to explain. And through the explanation, then I can navigate differently and go towards the path of smoking or not. And of course, you can wrap up, because I was a little bit worried that you might be smoking, right? So that's the reason why I choose not to do that. So that's the whole story behind the lighter and how I build the trust through this conversation. Now, as you are navigating through feedback conversations in the future with your managers, and you think, okay, so how does the feedback conversation contribute to the trust building? How do I build trust? I like to use the, hold on. So if you are navigating through feedback conversations with your team and you're wondering, how can I build more trust? I really like using a Brené Brown's metaphor about the jar of trust. If you heard it, you know what I'm talking about. If not, here's the gist of it. Imagine yourself that each of us, you and your team, you're holding a jar in front of you with marbles. And each marble represents an act of generosity, an act that contributes to more trust between two individuals. So each thing that you do that builds more trust adds one marble. If you mess it up, the handful of marbles goes out of this jar. Depending on how full the jar is, then the feedback conversation will go in different ways, and it more likely start in that defensive state if the jar is almost empty. And if the jar is full, then it will start in the receptive state, because I trust your intention. You proved me in the past that I can trust your intention. Your action speaks louder, right? And that way the conversation will go differently. So imagine if I storm into Nathan's room and I said, dude, why this lighter is in your pocket? Do you smoke? Immediately a full hand of marbles goes out of my jar. By saying, hey, should I be worried? I just added another marble to that jar, which then helps future conversations, right? So use it as an analogy and think like each feedback interaction, not necessarily like when you're sharing, but each feedback interaction adds or depletes from that jar. It adds marbles or takes away the marbles, okay? So that's super important. Now, I've mentioned something when I spoke. Okay, thank you for letting me know that. You can hear me just fine. Now, I also mentioned about the fact that when I finished this conversation with Nathan, at the end of it, I had a choice to hold him accountable in the future against something different, whether it's against him spending money, smoking cigarettes, ruining his health, or breaking the trust given with him. And here's the important lessons that is critical to you as a leader, as a manager. We tend to shed the light and hold people accountable differently with our feedback. In fact, each feedback conversation, the challenging one, holds your team accountable against something. And the default response is to hold people accountable against their job role. We are using our formal authority in the conversation. So we are saying something like, hey, didn't want to see you doing that again, or last time I told you not to do that, and this is not how I asked you to do it, and you've done it. We're holding people accountable against their job role, job description, the fact that we're paying them, the fact this is the quarterly and annual goals of the team, of our company, because we set these goals with you as between employee and employer, and you should hit them, that you should contribute to the working team. They're all important, but they don't have as much emotional value, and they're not bringing people emotionally into the conversation, meaning they are less likely to listen and engage and follow through it. There is not enough irresistible reasons why I should listen and engage with your feedback, because there is only as much of being professional attitude and mindset that can sustain me throughout my career. We shouldn't be relying on the fact that you should be professional, you should be listening to my feedback, I'm your manager, you're the employee, because it's not going to work in the long run, in the long term. Instead, what you want is you want to make your employees the primary beneficient of the feedback. Make it all about them. So I'll share you with some examples, and I go back to how I choose to raise my kids and how with the conversations that I have. And intuitively, we all know that. And as a parents, we want to do it that way. But in the workplace, we're forgetting about how valuable intrinsic motivation is and how valuable it is to teach people to do the right thing versus what I want or what the company wants you to do. So I've got one very simple rule with my kids. You make your own decision, you do whatever you do, as long as you don't harm other people physically and emotionally, or yourself. When that happens, you have my full guidance, full support. I'll challenge you. I'll ask you questions that might be really difficult to answer, but at the end of the day, you're going to make your own decisions and you're going to live with those decisions. I'll just guide you until you don't hurt other human beings emotionally and physically. So that's my line. That's how I choose to raise my kids. And you see, from that point onwards, my whole conversations around my son is about doing the right thing, not what needs to be done. And I always use the example of, hey, I could tell to Nathan and to Xavier not to hurt other people because there is a law that forbids you to do so. There is law enforcement structures that are going to hold you accountable. You've got police, you've got court, you get caught, you go to the jail. You know, those are your consequences. That's not part of my conversation with him. It isn't. What I'm saying is, don't do it because it's morally wrong. It's unethical. And it does make sense, right? It sounds that's the right thing to do. Yes. Now let's move into workplace. Let's think about how managers tend to share their feedback. And when you go back to your workplace now, or when you read your emails or Slack messages or you're on the Zoom calls, listen carefully how feedback often is being shared. And what you're more likely to find is that lots of feedback is shared, that the passive feedback of that, and the message is, you got to do that because your manager is asking you to do so. You got to do that because that's what the company needs from you. You have to do it because that's what clients want. Those are external factors. What you want to do is to flip it and just give that irresistible reasons why you should be engaging in all that feedback. So managers can use the language quite often, or using the language like, do that for me, or can you do that for me? Don't do that for me. I don't want to see that ever happen. Or how often you've been in a situation when you're doing something and your colleague or other manager, junior manager, comes in and says, hey, don't do that, because if the GM sees you, you're in trouble. So the question, actually, the whole theme of this episode is thanks to David Breer, who's CEO of fintech company called 11FS. And so imagine, David and the whole team and you guys, if the feedback quite often within the company is being shared that, hey, don't do that because David doesn't like it to be done that way. This is not what David wants. So the language is, we do what he or she wants versus we do or don't do what's right and the wrong thing to do. We have to align our language. And perhaps it's not your intention to be in a situation as a leader, especially the senior one. You don't want people to think, don't do it because of me, because if I find you're in trouble. But then you have to step away and think about, do I use the language during my meetings, my emails, when I share the feedback, that accentuates the fact that this is not what I want. This is what works for me. This is how I want it to be done. Start listening to how you communicate and how your colleagues are communicating, because that will help you tremendously. And you will remove that factor from your feedback culture. That's another way of sharing, of creating more trust within your organization, by removing this formal authority from your language and coaching your people and sharing the feedback for what's right to do. And to do that, what you need is to know your people very well. So in my workshops, I always talk about, let's park away the employee contract that we've signed, and let's sign a social contract between me and you. Let's make you primary beneficiary of everything that we do here. You're not working for me, I'm working for you, in other words. And here's what I mean by that. If we park away the job responsibilities, the management responsibilities, the employee responsibilities, and create a social contract between me and you, now I'm making everything all about you. How can you benefit from it? And of course, it does require to know your people very well. An example of that would be a while ago when we were allowed to travel to different offices. I was in the IT media office, and over there, Harley and Alan doing phenomenal job with creating a people-centric culture. Tremendous work. And so I was sitting in the downstairs next to this open kitchen, and there is this file on the table, and I was flipping through it, and it's like each page had one employee with different facts about them, some quirky stories. But one thing that struck with me was their goals. Most of those people, as their goals, they've put, I want to buy a house. Great goal. But you see, knowing that small piece of information helps you a lot with how you develop people, how you share the feedback, and how you coach them. So I'll use now myself as an example throughout my working career. Why it's so important to know, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why it's important for you to know why your people doing what they are doing. When I moved to the UK, 2006, if you hired me at the time, I had one goal only, and that was save enough money to bring my family to the UK. I would roll my sleeves, I would work 7 days a week, I would work my ass off, because that was my goal. The only thing that I cared is to earn more money, and I would work 7 days a week. That was my driver. Now, once things settled down, and I've discovered at Hard Rock Cafe the concept of leadership, I've decided as an individual that no matter what I do in my life, I would always want to create that safety, that belonging to the person to my left and to my right throughout my career. So now, if you as my manager, as my leader, understand that, then your feedback can be tied and should be tied into my goal. You see, if I am a manager in the kitchen at the time, for instance, and your feedback can be then focused on two different ways. You could tell me that the way I engage with people is not professional. It's not how managers should conduct themselves. It's not what HR allows me to do. It's not what the rules are, and I can get whatever. If you start quoting the law for me, if you start quoting my contract and what being professional means, yes, it's important. But what's more powerful is if you flip it and you share the feedback with me and link it with my desire to create psychological safety to the person to my left and to my right. So you have a choice when you share the feedback. Just like I have choice with my kids and with everyone around to teach them to do what's right or what the law says, what that professional contract says in your workplace. You almost always have a choice in the workplace to lead your feedback. I don't mean don't share the feedback that doesn't talk about legal requirements, because there are situations where it has to, right? Of course. I'm not saying move it away from it. I'm saying, what's the main message? What are you leading it with? What's your instinct? What's your default response in sharing the feedback? So if you tie it to someone's intrinsic desire, intrinsic driver, you are more likely to get their attention. They are more likely to listen and follow through. Now, a few years later, if you hired me, I was a lot more vocal about being a public speaker in the future. I was a lot more vocal of being a coach and enjoying being a coach. That was my lifetime mission. Now, so if you know that as my manager, your feedback now changes a little bit, and how you engage with me changes as well to get more attention from me. You can take it to the next level. And if you really know me on a deep level as an individual, as a human being, you can get the best out of me, and you can tweak your feedback to get the best out of me. And only one person managed to really understand my nature as a human being, my goals, my passions, who I am. And the whole feedback spoke to who I am and how the future Raf in 20 years' time will benefit from that feedback. Because that's what you want to do in your workplace. Figure out what drives your people, why they are there, what do they love, and link the feedback to that. And that's what I call the social contract. And it's a part of what I teach during my workshop. Perhaps I'll do one Q&A about social contract, guys, itself. Once you figured it out, the feedback is more likely to land and you get my attention. It's irresistible reason for me to listen, right? Another example of that would be, imagine that somebody told you during the interview that they want to be a leader that is empathetic, right? And they, on this occasion, they haven't really behaved in an empathetic way. You have a choice whether you share your feedback filtered through the desire to be empathetic or being professional. You have a choice as a manager. If you choose to share the feedback, hey, I remember that you've mentioned that being empathetic is important to you, and on this occasion, you haven't shown much empathy. It's different, a lot more powerful to do. Your behavior was unacceptable, not professional. I don't want to see that ever again. You can see the difference. You can see now, you can see how much more trust you build if you link the feedback intrinsically or extrinsically. So linking feedback intrinsically adds more marbles to the jar. Leading with more professional not necessarily detracts from them, but it doesn't really help that much. And if you continuously do that, it will start detracting, because I will start questioning your intention. And here's another point of using feedback as a tool to build the trust. I don't see any comments, and I'm wondering, oh, there is a final comment on the LinkedIn. I was worrying for a second that LinkedIn does not feed any comments to my stream, but it does. So I just need some comment. Now, that leads me to another point, guys. Your intention versus perception, and how does it build the direct trust? I truly believe that your feedback comes from the good place. Your intention is to help another person. Your intention is to help another person. But if that intention is not aligned with the perception, then you might have just detracted from that trust. You might just remove a handful of marbles from that jar. And whilst when we share the feedback, it's less likely that we're gonna spot it. When we're on the receiving end, we know that. And I bet there were numbers of feedback that you received from a person that loves you, cares about you, and they really want to help you, and you thought that their intention isn't as good. Because here's the thing about us as human beings, guys. What we tend to do is we tend to judge others through their actions, but we judge ourselves through our intention. Because I know my intention was good, therefore you should listen to my feedback because I want to help you, and I know that feedback will help you a lot. But that's not always the case. We have to learn how to align one with the other. And perhaps when we're sharing feedback, quite often we're forgetting there are three things that we are always in control. Because we are misled and because we are focused so much on filtering our feedback through our intention. Hey, my intention is great, so my feedback is going to land and you're going to listen. We forgot that we are in control of three critical factors that help aligning that perception with intention. And that is place, emotional state, and time. I'm not the biggest fan of acronyms, or actually I'm not trying to create too many of those, but just before the session I thought, normally I talked about time, place, and emotional state, but if you reverse it, it's place, emotional state, and time, PET. And here's the thing, let's start with the place. You are in full control majority of the time where feedback takes place. If you handle it in the wrong place, if it's in front of everyone else, you've just removed some marbles from the jar. So first thing to be mindful is where the feedback is taking place. If it's an email conversation or Slack conversation, is it in front of everyone else? Or are you taking to the DMs, to the private messages, right? If perhaps with the Zoom calls, it's a little bit more difficult, but you don't have to share it then. You can just wait for the call to finish and then move back. And here's another thing. If you are in the office environment or you have a virtual call, saying that, hey, I need to talk with you later on in front of everyone else doesn't count. It detracts the trust already from the shared pool of trust. Because if you're storming into the office, say, hey, I need you to talk to you in a few minutes in my office, and you don't check the emotional state of yours, you're not only allowing yourself to be questioned through your intention, but you also put people into that defensive state already. They're already wondering what's going to happen. And they start in conversation in a little bit more stressed, anxious, nervous. So you don't want to do that. So place is the first one. Emotional state is the second one. Just like with my son and the lighter, as soon as I found it, I could choose to turn around and go back to his room and have this conversation. I wasn't in a good emotional place at that moment. It was too strong for me not to get that, heartbeat high and start spinning around with my thoughts. It just happened. What I did is I choose to go to the shop first, come back and have this conversation. 10 minutes later, not straight away. So I reset my emotions and I start a conversation in a lot more open manner, guys. And the last one is time. When the feedback is shared, very close to place. You can choose when you're sharing the feedback, especially with the practice. You don't have to do it in front of everyone else. You may wait to gather a little bit more information. Don't wait too long, of course. But if you hear the feedback, the tip in online that says feedback has to be as close as possible, as immediately as possible to the event, yes, but you got to be really mindful. And so, especially if the environment is quite environment is quite engaging and quick pace, like hospitality, sometimes there is this notion and feeling like there is no time to provide a feedback because the sections are busy, everything is busy, so I have to let that person know. That's a wrong call on your behalf. You have to be mindful, time, place, and emotional state of yours. If you get it wrong, you're losing the trust. If you get that right, those three things, you start building more trust. Because you see, within the feedback conversation, guys, it's all about creating more positive feedback experiences. By positive, I don't mean sharing positive feedback only. I mean that people read your intention as the good one. That's your goal. So I spoke already about the first few seconds. I shared a few examples, guys, with you. How important it is, how you start the conversation, where and when. Let me just check my list as well. I spoke a little bit about the social contract, hugely important. How to make an employee the primary beneficent of your feedback, hugely important, right? And you have the choice how you communicate, even though you feel like or you think like or you've been trained like, to use that formal authority and to use your job title and to explain to people that they have to do because client wants that, or they have to do because company needs this. It's true, it's important, it's not a false statement, but I will respond to it differently and I will work harder differently depending on what the reasons are behind it. The best leaders out there understand that and they tap into that intrinsic motivation. Okay. Now, what else here, guys? I'm pretty much, let me see. Oh, receiving end. I've got something to say also on the receiving end. Are there any questions? What questions, guys, do you have? Should them? If not, I'll quickly move on to a bit more about the receiving and the requesting feedback, which is also important too. And those are the opportunities for you to build a little bit more trust as you engage in feedback conversations. And that would be pretty much it for it. So, receiving and requesting feedback. Guys, another huge opportunity for you to build more trust with your team. And it's not necessarily only about how do you receive the feedback in the real time, how you responded about it. There are also other opportunities and moments when you can start paying more attention towards that would help you build more trust. So think about how you engage in a brainstorm session with your team. Look for examples when somebody disagrees with you and what's your response to it. Are you celebrating in front of everyone the fact that you've just been either proved wrong, or your point of view was expanded, or you're just saying that's a good idea, or I like this? Okay, so think about the team meeting settings, or think about a feedback that your employee brought to you and you thought, oh, that's a valid point. What do you do with that piece of information later on? Are you looking for opportunities to share with everyone else that John has challenged you, told you this, you've reflected on it, and now you share it with everyone else? Are you going back to your employees when they share feedback with you and you say, you know what, I've actually thought about what you've said, I've reflected on that feedback, and you're right, and this is how it helps me, and this is what I think about it? Or the meeting is over and perhaps somebody shared the idea and you haven't really bought into this idea, but then you go back home and you thought about it, you know, I like this point, I like that. Are you going back to that person and shares it? Are you publicly admitting that somebody changed your opinion or point of view or not? Those are the moments that will help you, again, same thing, build a little bit more trust, and they will show that you mean the business, that your intention is really clear, that I'm not afraid to being vulnerable in this whole conversation. You're earning more right to challenge people as well, okay? So those are another few ways in which you can build a slightly more trust, and each interaction really helps you. If you go back to the times when and find the leaders that could challenge you directly and you've responded really well to it, think about what was about them, what they have done up to that point to earn that right. To be in a position when they challenged you, you didn't mind, and somebody else tells you, and you're like, whoa, this is not right, this is wrong, this is not how it was, and you're looking for ways to engage and disengage from that feedback. You'll find that the trust is underlying of that root cause problem. So building it more, hugely important, guys. Right, that's almost everything from me, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for commenting on Instagram. I'm just kind of looking on the sides because I haven't positioned my phone really good to read the comments from the LinkedIn, guys. I hope you enjoyed this session. Like I've mentioned, you can actually see it down below in my live stream as well on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm going to turn this live streams into podcast. It won't be anything too fancy. I won't spend too much time on editing it. I'll just make it audio clean. I'll just upload it there with a new podcast, so you'll see what it is, and it's easier for you to come back if you need to listen to it. Oh, I've got a question from Sebastian. How do I give honest feedback to my boss as it is without glossing it? I guess I worry more about having an awkward work relationship. Love this question. Let me share it, Sebastian. And thank you for asking. I appreciate that. I think sharing feedback with a person that has that senior position to you, it's a bit more challenging, a bit more difficult. I would go back to what I talked when I talked about a social contract and the reasons why we do what we do. The question first for you, Sebastian, to everyone else that I have is, how much do you know your boss, your manager? What drives them? What is their goal? And of course, we've got every single manager is different. They take feedback differently. They proved you that they are taking this feedback differently. And so there are two things that I recommend to do. First is start building a relationship that it's easier for you to challenge them and to share that feedback. So start with some small steps. So you build a relationship and they see actually that you're not sharing it to undermining them as the boss, because that's one of the biggest fears that managers have. If you challenge them, if you challenge your boss in front of everyone else, and that particular manager is not ready to be challenged in front of everyone else, is not comfortable with being vulnerable and not having all those answers just yet, you got to help that person become that type of leader. So challenging in front of everyone else is not the best idea. Now, what else you can do other than building that relationship through sharing a small and tangible feedback and engaging with different ideas with them? You got to be really clear with your intention and also say how it makes you feel. So laying it out front that there is something that you have to share that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable and nervous, but you have to do it because you want to help that person. And the language here is very important, that you're helping your manager, not the manager. Sorry, you're helping the person, not the manager. So it's like, hey, you as a manager, you can't say this and that. It's not the best idea. when you bring it into human to human level, eye to eye, hey, I'm worried that some people may perceive you as less empathetic, or hey, I'm worried that in occasions you're coming across as somebody who doesn't listen to other opinions and like to share that with you. So you can start with like, look, there's a bit of feedback I'd like to share with you, which is a little bit uncomfortable for me to share it, but I think it's important to do that because I'm worried that there are moments that you're coming across as somebody who doesn't listen very well, who doesn't take feedback on board very well. Whatever your feedback really is, I'm worried about you and I want to help you with it. Even though it's uncomfortable, I believe it's the right thing to do. So the language here is very important. Your intention, address the emotions in here that you feel a little bit nervous about it, to show that your vulnerability and your courage as well. So that will be in the moment. But in the long run, if you know that your manager is the person who may not take the feedback very well, start looking, Sebastian, for opportunities to build that relationship and to earn that right almost to challenge them. Okay? Your manager is a human being just as you are. Sometimes we are wearing the masks to hold back our what we're not good with, to project a different image of ourselves, and the one that we thought we have to as a manager, which is strong, tough, has all the answers. Because that seems to be the way that, if you look at the past role models and how we engage in feedback conversation and how we led people and what the manager should be like, is the person with formal authority at the top that has all the answers, knows everything, is the smartest and the best, and has all things figured out. I'm sorry, guys, but that's a bullshit. We got to start calling it as it is. But that doesn't stop just yet the fact that a lot of managers are conveying themselves that way and they believe that's the right thing to do. And we're still in that age and time and those old habits are dying hard, and we think we have to have all those answers as the leaders, as the managers. We don't. So we got to help them take off that mask and be a bit more comfortable and vulnerable with it. And you can also do that by displaying the same amount of vulnerability. And if you both seize it, then it will help you build a better relationship. And so if you are starting your management meeting, if you're starting, if you engaging in, I don't know, a team meeting, for instance, Sebastian, you're working at TGI Fridays, I noticed, and so you're part of hospitality. So perhaps you got your team briefs before the shift, or all-star meetings, right? And so you're the GM, and so the one above you is your area manager, and you've got your junior managers. So think about building the relationship with your team when you stand in front of everyone and you say, hey, this was my plan. This is how I want to tackle a certain challenge, a certain issue. But my kitchen manager had a better idea, told me differently, and I'm glad that she did it or he did it. You're showing that vulnerability to everyone around you, and you're showing that it's important to do so, and you are willing to admit it publicly. So you're celebrating the fact that somebody challenged you, had a different point of view, and you're willing to say, yes, let's do that, versus speak with your KM in your office, agree to the challenges and let him or her do it. You bring it to the open forum and you say, that's how it was. And if your area manager is there, brilliant. If it's not, again, find the ways of doing the same thing. How do you celebrate those successes? So let's use the same example, Sebastian, of your kitchen manager had a great idea how to make, I don't know, your takeaway business more efficient, right? Because that's really important right now, relevant right now. You then can sharing it with your area GMs, area kitchen managers, and tag your area manager and just mentioned, this is what happens. I thought about it that way. Thankfully, Mike had a better idea. This is what we've done, and this is what it works. Kudos to him or her. And your manager sees that level of vulnerability, and you start slowly breaking and cracking that mask of, I have to have all this answer because I'm the boss. And then how you're taking it back to your manager, in your case, perhaps to your area manager, is finding those slow, small moments when you're sharing more feedback with him or her. Start with positive, perhaps. Right? Build that feedback relationship, saying, hey, between me and you, there is lots of feedback going on right now. Another way, and it's down to individuals, could be saying it up front. Hey, I've promised myself this year, what I'll do is I'll share challenging feedback no matter how uncomfortable it feels, because I want all the people become the best version of themselves. So if you announce it publicly, that that's your goal, then when you're sharing your feedback with your boss, you may tie it, number one, into why you want to help them, and they already know, or you can remind that, hey, I promised myself that I'll share a challenging feedback no matter how uncomfortable it is. And right now it is uncomfortable to share it with you because I'm worried how this conversation will go. But it is something that I'd like that you need to know because it will help you. And again, you're helping the person rather than the manager become a better version of that or work towards X and Y. So that's another thing. Sebastian, one last thing I'll mention before I wrap up this question is, do you know what's the driving motivation of your manager, the person above you? And you may hear it at times when they said it in ad hoc conversation, or they might made it publicly. So if they say, hey, I want to be more approachable leader, that could be it. It's quite vague, right? But that already gives you an opportunity to use it. And you can start with something, hey, you've mentioned that you're working this year on being more approachable. So I'd like to now share a little bit more challenging feedback towards you that will help you become more approachable, or that will help you become whatever that is. So you can see how the opportunities are there if you find them and link them with your feedback. I hope that answered that question, Sebastian. Those are the few ways in which you can do that. Build an ongoing relationship with your managers. And if it's still not there, or you're working with a new manager, think about what's the reason behind you sharing this feedback and verbalize it. And don't be afraid to sharing with how it makes you feel to have this conversation as well. Show that vulnerability and courage at the same time. Okay? Awesome, guys. So, wow, that's nearly an hour of it. I really enjoyed this conversation, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts. What, if anything, was the most valuable part of this session? That would help me tremendously. Like I've mentioned, this live Q&A will be turned into podcast as well. So I'm working on it this week. So you can have it next Sunday, another live feedback Q&A with different topic. I haven't decided just yet. So if you have any ideas, shoot me them. I'll make it happen. If you got any questions and concerns, message me. I'll do my very best answering them next week, guys. Meanwhile, there is also a note down below. I have just opened my bite-sized workshop that is on the 11th of February, and it's all about positive feedback. So talking about building trust, sharing positive feedback is super important and one of your best tools, guys, to do that. And I'll be sharing a 2 hours coaching session, 2 hours webinar, where I'll coach you how to use positive feedback, not only to boost your team morale and how they feel, but also how to coach your team through using positive feedback. You can use it in both ways. There's also a third way in which you can do that, and that is build mentor-like relationship with your managers through sharing positive feedback. I'm not sure if within 2 hours I'll be able to touch on that, but perhaps another day, Sebastian, I'll talk about something else. How can you use positive feedback to build mentor-like relationship with your managers, especially with people that are senior to you as well, guys. So 11th of February, hopefully to see you there. Is £30 per person, guys. And the last thing, my next live interview for the podcast is on the 1st of February. And oh my gosh, guys, I'm excited. I mentioned about it last week. I'm going to talk about it again because it's a huge one. And it's with, it's about tactical empathy. It's about using emotional skills the way that a hostage negotiator would use them. So next week, Derek Gaunt will be my guest. He wrote a phenomenal book, Ego Failure Authority, and he spent decades as a hostage negotiator. So guys, tuned in. This one is going to be huge because it will help us how to really tune into the conversation with people, build that relationship, build that trust, and use tactical empathy in your workplace and your personal life as well, guys. I'm super hyped about it. So that's 1st of February, guys. I'm glad, Sebastian, that I've answered your questions. That makes me happy. That makes my Sunday, guys. Now, I'm getting a little bit overly excited. I'll talk a lot. Guys, talking for an hour, it's bloody hard work. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate your generosity with your time. And see you next week.